Lyon and Scott Burdick here to to interview, and we're very fortunate that we are going to be doing a live, well, what would we call it, demonstration and paint, live stream demonstration and painting session with them next week. And that date is March 20th, and that'll be at from 1 to 5 p.m. And if you go, for the people that are on our Facebook and Instagram live right now, if you go to our website, eastoakstudio.com, at the top of the page there will be pinned a link to be able to watch this on much more high resolution. So all you need to do is go there, and then there'll also be a place for you to comment, to ask questions. So today, that's basically what we're going to do. We're just going to interview them, ask questions about their life, how they paint, and if y'all have anything that y'all would like to ask them either about the live stream or about their story, please join us. Look forward to hearing your questions.
Except for Facebook and Instagram.
All right, for everyone who's on Facebook and Instagram, this is the beauty of live stream. It's very candid, and anything can happen. So, yeah, we're good. All the lights and cameras are on.
Not that light.
All right, so we are still going and going strong. All right, so basically, I wanted to ask y'all a few questions. So the first thing I wanted to ask you is just tell us a little bit about your history, how y'all got started and got into painting. And you know, Scott, if you want, you can start with you, and then Susan, you tell your story sort of before y'all met. And yeah, you can just look at this camera or any of the other cameras.
So how we got started painting?
Yeah, so got started painting. What got you interested in it?
Well, I always liked, probably the first interest I had was as a kid. I had a lot of operations as a kid. I had like club feet when I was born, so I couldn't walk. And so I had these over my childhood.
All through high school, too.
Yeah, well, they kind of stopped around like the 5th grade, and then I had to have another couple operations in high school. So I was on crutches for a whole year, did one leg, and then I had 2 weeks, and then they did the other leg, so I was on crutches. But so in hospitals and stuff, and a lot of time, you know, at home where I couldn't go out and, you know, do things as much, I did a lot of drawing and reading, and we would write little stories and things and illustrate them. And my mom would like bring books, you know, for how to draw like simple shapes, like those simple things like, oh, draw a helicopter, you know, how you can break down to, you do this circle and that circle. And then I just got into drawing. So it was kind of like drawing and writing in general for a long time. And then I got more serious about it in high school, because I learned that there was a school in Chicago called the American Academy of Art that had a scholarship for graduating seniors. And you'd have to go in and do like a life drawing and a still life drawing for a whole day. And all the students that were wanting to get the scholarship would come and do this for the day, just still life in the morning. So in high school, I knew that was really my only chance to get to go to this school, to go to schools if I won the scholarship. And so in junior and senior year in high school, my senior year, like I said, I was on crutches, so I would be taking the bus in the L downtown to go take classes. I would take it on Saturdays, and then in the summer I took it every day, life drawing classes. That's all I took, to try and get good, because I wasn't good enough to win the scholarship, but doing those 2 years of practice, I did win the scholarship, and that's how I got to go to school. And so that was pretty much what changed my whole life as far as having a chance to go into art, because nobody I knew was an artist, or there was really no pathway for that from my neighborhood. And so I just started doing illustration. And then it was from there that I started to meet, and I just assumed I'd go into illustration. But I only took life drawing and oil painting. So, but then you met people like at the Palette and Chisel, seeing artists who were making a living at it, like Richard Schmid and Irving Shapiro, and a few other people there that were professional artists. And I realized the type of illustration that I want to do doesn't exist anymore, because I liked Howard Pyle and N.C. Wyeth and all these sorts of artists. And so that's when I saw, wow, you could actually paint those sorts of narrative paintings, you know, in oil and stuff, and you could make a living as an artist. So that's how the long way that I got into it. So yeah.
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 By the way, these two paintings right here on either side are both Scott's and Susan's. So just so you know. Now, would you say that those N.C. Wyeth and Powell were like some of your main influences throughout, or did you?
Well, in the beginning, that's all I had seen. Is like, you know, the old illustrators, like reading books. Like I would read The White Company or Treasure Island and these sorts of things. And so it was pretty much Norman Rockwell, N.C. Wyeth, Howard Pyle were the main ones. And then I would see some other of the old illustrators. But we had never gone to the Art Institute or anything. I never heard of any gallery artists or famous artists, really. I mean, you might hear Leonardo da Vinci or something like that, but that was about all I knew when I went to school. In fact, when I went to school, I didn't know any contemporary artists. In fact, when Richard Schmid first came there, I'd never heard of him and was going to skip watching the demo because I wanted to be drawing instead in class. And my teacher said, you have to go see this painter do a demo. And so it was just a different world for me. So that opened my... And then we would go to the Art Institute. Sargent had a show there in my second year of school there, so I would go it was for a month, every lunch break, Nancy Guzik and I would go to see the Sargent show. And, you know, so that was a whole different, I was just like blown away.
Yeah.
You know,
that's
so.
Incredible. And
you could see where the influences from a lot of the illustrators that I liked, like Montgomery Flagg and all these people, and Sunbloom and stuff, on these painters like Zorn and Sargent and stuff. You could see, well, that's where they were getting their influences for, you know, it was kind of the source from that. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's
anyways.
Awesome. Susan, tell us a little bit about your history.
My history is that my father had gone to the Art Institute in the late 50s. So I had kind of grown up a little bit around art because he bought art, but I wasn't talented. I mean, I didn't draw or anything. I saw a program, I think spring of my junior year in high school, I'd seen a program on PBS, you know, on Georgia O'Keeffe. And I was just so blown away by her life. You know, I guess, you know, also being a woman, I was attracted to her energy of just being independent. It, like being the artist life just seemed so exciting to me. And I remember telling my dad, and then so that summer before my senior year, I took some Saturday classes at the Art Institute, and it was all exciting because going downtown, but unfortunately the Art Institute was all kind of abstract and they didn't really teach you. It was more just like, isn't it fun to go here? Isn't it fun, you know? But they didn't teach you anything. I really didn't have a clue about what I was going to do. I had no idea. But my dad, because he was kind of in creative merchandise and advertising a little bit, he knew a teacher at the American Academy. The American Academy was just a technical school. So you just got an associate's degree and you didn't do anything but just draw and paint. And so he signed me up for summer classes after high school. And I mean, literally, he came home one day and said, "Oh, I signed you up." Because I guess I thought, oh, I was a little flighty and I didn't really have a clue. I thought, oh, I guess I'll go to the Art Institute. But he came home and said, "Oh, I've signed you up for summer classes at the American Academy." And I was like, wow. I mean, like, honestly, it scared me to death because I didn't have any skills, but I knew that it was a technical school, so I thought, oh, okay, I could go into commercial art. Like I could do cut up and paste or whatever they did back then for magazines, and I was like, oh, okay, you don't really have to be talented. I can just kind of go in this graphic general direction. Unfortunately, to get into the school, you had to show a portfolio. Like, what? So I do remember buying all kinds of art books and just like doing copies from art books, and literally that's what I showed, just on big newsprint. I showed up at this and I was like, here's my portfolio. And I guess, you know, like if you're a paying student, like, okay, come on in, you know. So I was completely unprepared. But I wasn't able to start for a while because obviously it would be late enrollment. So I had to wait like half a year. But so that's pretty much, and I thought I was going to go and be commercial art, but I tell this story that the first couple weeks in school, you had to take fundamentals, and that class was based on Andrew Loomis's book, Creative Illustration. I don't know if it's a famous book about anything you wanted to know about color and perspective and graphic design and product placement and all this stuff. And then the other class was life drawing. And Scott's teacher, Mr. Parks, and who also taught a lot of our friends, and he had been there since pretty much World War II.
Yeah.
He knew Richard, but he was like this grandfather who was so loving, and everybody just melted towards him because he was almost like Mr. Rogers. And my other teacher was, just say different. And, you know, one of those teachers that like to intimidate students instead of take them under their wing. And here I was, someone who had absolutely no confidence and was scared to death and really felt completely not sure of what I was doing. Within 2 weeks, I'm like, I'm gonna go into fine art, because not that I had talent, but that the loving energy was from the fine art department. So I gravitated towards Mr. Parks because he seemed safe and he wanted to nurture you and he wanted to support you. And the other stuff seems scary and like competitive and nobody wants to help you and all that stuff. So I went to the American Academy, and Scott had already graduated, but I had heard about him because he was so good and he had all his paintings all over the walls. So as I was going to school, that's all I heard about was these artists who painted at the Palette and Chisel with Richard Schmid. And sometimes Scott would actually come back to visit. And I would be in class and Mr. Parks and Scott would just walk in and everyone would be like, oh my God, that's Scott Burdick. You know, like, and
Which I didn't have any idea that was true.
Of course you don't. You don't have any idea, but you know, because Mr. Parks and all the other teachers would talk about him so much as he's the one making it, because he was making it in school. And so even when he's like 20, 21, he's making it like immediately out of school. So he was like that epitome of what it was like. And we'd heard about Dan Gerhardt's and I'd heard about Nancy Guzik and Rose Franson, but I mean, so it was this group along with Richard Schmid, like they are the A-team, like someday, like wow, I just, you know, it's like this thing to live up to. And but I didn't know Scott, but I had gone to a couple of his shows, and
we didn't meet there, so yeah.
Right, and so what had happened, maybe a year and a half later, I started oil painting, and within the first month I had a friend who was sitting next to me in oil painting class, and she was modeling at the Palette and Chisel, which is an art club. It was about 2 miles. When I went to the American Academy, it was right on Michigan Avenue, and it was literally right across the street from the Art Institute. And the Palette and Chisel is in the Gold Coast, more towards the lake, and about 2 miles. And she said, oh yeah, I'm posing at the Palette and Chisel. And I was like, how do you do that? Like, that seems so exciting to me. She said, why don't you one day show up when I'm posing and I'll introduce you to everybody. And so it was like the biggest deal in my life. I curled my hair, you know, I mean, I was like, I brought my parents, you know, I still lived at home. So I guess I didn't say this, was that, I mean, Scott and I both lived at home when we went to the academy because we both lived, you know, I lived right on the train line, so I could just take it downtown. Yeah. And so my parents and I went to the Palette and Chisel, and my parents wouldn't go upstairs, but I was like, oh my God. I mean, I remember how scared I was, you know, walking up to the 3rd floor, because the Palette and Chisel is like an old Italianate brownstone mansion. 1st floor is gallery, 2nd floor is private studios, 3rd floor is like a ballroom that got turned into a studio. And that's where they have the models. And I remember walking up there and just thinking, this is the scariest thing I've ever done. And I saw my friend, and she walked over, and Scott just happened to be the monitor. And literally the first thing out of his mouth was, oh my God, you should pose for us. I just started to scream. I was like, ah!
I did a portrait
oh my God.
yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. And I was so happy. I'm sorry, but I can't, I mean, I literally cannot hold my enthusiasm. I was so excited. And of course, I didn't realize at the time that as a monitor, you are constantly looking for models. You know, I mean, like
now she does,
trying to grab people off the street. But, you know, I just thought, this is like the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. And so anyways, but I guess I'd skipped over a part, was that I had told my dad, since I had followed Scott's career, I said, you should really buy a painting of Scott Burdick. He's going to be famous. And so he had given me a present of Scott's for Christmas right before that. Wow. So I came up to Scott and I was like, I have a painting of yours. And he's like, oh, really? And it was just funny. But then maybe a month later, I started to pose. And that's when we found out that we literally lived like a mile or half from each other.
Right.
Because he had an apartment by now. And I'm like, oh my God. So you realize that all these people who go to the palette and chisel around can live an hour. And that we just lived at like this tiny little close. So it just seemed like friends, you know. It's like, oh, you live there? Oh yeah, I live there. I live in Oak Park. And but that's exactly how we met. Well, you've got to tell a story about Nancy.
Oh yeah, because I remember that time too when I met, and we were always like Sue said, we're always looking for models, and so we had her friend posing there, and so I asked Sue, you know, she was so excited, you know, and everything, and she was an artist, so she said, I go to the American Academy, you know. I was like, oh cool. I said, well, you know, we do this portrait, the portrait one. I think it was the Monday, Sunday portrait one, and I said, why don't you pose for one of the portraits here? And she was so excited, and so I said, great. And so I put her down on the calendar, and then I went and told my friend Nancy Guzik, who we'd been in school together for, you know, for the whole time. And I said, oh, that girl over there is going to pose for us for this Sunday session. And she goes, oh, that girl over there that you're going to fall in love with and marry? That's exactly what Nancy said. I was like, what? How do you get that? And it's like, maybe because she was so pretty and so excited and all dressed up. And
I mean, I was really getting up now, but I mean, I was still very naive and still so young. To me, it was just so exciting to like, just to pose there. So that's, you know, so I posed there a few times, and that's when Richard painted me, and Scott did a couple paintings of me and stuff. But that's how we met. I mean, and so you just called me up for kind of say, oh, you want to go see a movie? And we pretty much just started going out immediately.
Right, almost right away then, after that,
Wow.
So that was February 20th. That was our first date. We call it our first date since we went out.
We call it our anniversary.
And so was that we just had our 30th anniversary.
Just had our 30th.
Of
Congratulations.
First date.
Know,
So that was fun. And then we just got married a couple of years later. It's kind of fun.
Anyway, so that's it, you know. And so to me, like meeting Scott and that group was really important, because when I was in school, there were some kids like me that went right after high school, but then there was a lot of older adults in their 30s. You know, it was a wide gambit. Because it was a technical school, people could go back to school for to just maybe tune up their drawing, or to tune up something with computer graphics, or to tune up something else. And so, you know, it was just all this big age difference. And I could tell a lot of people weren't that serious. It was interesting how, you know, they would have jobs or this or that, but they would never paint at home. And I didn't understand how much work it took until I met Scott, because when we first started to date and everything, I mean, he just painted all day. Like, him and Nancy would go to school all day and then go to the palette and chisel and paint at night, and then Saturday and Sunday paint then. And they just painted every day, and like sometimes like Scott and I would see each other during the day, and then he would get home and start painting at 8 o'clock at night. And, you know, hearing about that work ethic and seeing how their lives were completely about art, that there was no separation. And when I met Richard Schmidt and I went to his house, I mean, his house was his studio. He didn't have, it wasn't like studio separate. You walked into his little Victorian house, every single part of his house was a painting. I mean, I'd never, you know, every single angle, every single table could have, like, if you look at all his paintings, you could have just sat a model down, and that scene was a painting. And then he walked in, and then it was like a living room, dining room, and the dining room was his studio. So it was his life. And all these things seeped into me that, right, if you want to make a living at art and you are an artist, there's no separation.
Right.
And I used to try. So after about 6 to 8 months, I became a member of the Palette and Chisel. And then probably a little bit of time after that, I became a monitor, which is a volunteer job. You just monitor a session so that you get models. But I used to try and get all my friends from the academy. I said, you should come and paint there. And I could not get one, not one student. I would try, there were a few friends, and I would say, well, pose. And even find some of the people that I had composed Richard's books. But I'd like, you should compose at the palette. But I could never get them to paint, ever. So it's interesting how it's almost innate in you. Like, are you willing, is that drive so strong? And also, like what Scott says, I remember maybe 2 months after I started oil painting, I was 20, you know, I literally had just picked up a paintbrush, I just met Scott, and Richard came and did a slideshow. And I'd never really heard of him, except for Mr. Parks would mention him every now and then. I was vibrating after watching this slideshow. Like, there's art like this. A human being that I can touch and talk to is doing art like this, because, like Scott says, for the most part, artists were like Rembrandt. They were so far away, distant,
detached,
that I couldn't even understand the beginning of how they would do anything. So this man did this beautiful work, and it made me so excited. I was on cloud 9. I remember just feeling like you're Cinderella going home, like, oh my God, there's something so beautiful that's possible. And when I got to school the next day, there was like this gambit of energy. And half the people wanted to criticize him. The other half wanted to quit painting. And so you realize what side of the fence do people lie on. Either you want to criticize him because he's too good or too pretty or too something, or he's too good and you just realize you'll never live up to it, so you just give it up. And you almost like, you know, disdain life because of that. And I just was like, what are you talking about? The fact that this man did this makes it seem it's possible that you could do it. So that was a big eye-opener for me about the people's choices and how it's not easy to be an artist. And, you know, you have to, I mean, when Scott and I first moved in together, I mean, we would live month to month. I mean, it was literally month to month. We never went out to eat. We never bought anything. It was always just check by check. You could then pay your rent. We couldn't travel. And so us moving down to North Carolina was finally one of the reasons to say, you know, one of our passions is travel. So for us to be able to go anywhere and to not have high rent and to actually have studios that aren't like a spare bedroom in an apartment is we have to buy something that's inexpensive and bigger in an area that's rural so that we could travel. And that's, you know, why we decided to move down to North Carolina.
So let's talk about that. Your travels end up being in a lot of your paintings, and so what is it about the travel that inspires you? Why do you go to the places that you go? Is there influences from other artists that has inspired you to do that? Just tell us a little bit about how that happened.
Well, I think we were inspired a lot by Sargent, because he traveled. You see paintings he did from Morocco and places, and then I do remember artists like Ned Jacob. There are artists that are older than us, and or McGrath.
Oh, Clarence McGrath. Yeah.
You know, these are artists that maybe not a lot of people know about, but we had, you know, heard about through the grapevine or through books or this or that. And you're like, oh my God, this man, you know, traveled to, you know, Iraq or traveled to Africa or traveled here and there, Mexico, and the settings were just so exquisite. And I think, well, you should talk about the fact that you always wanted to paint cultures and outfits, and so you would go to King
the Renaissance Fair. Yeah. When I was in school, I mean, we had taken a couple trips. We would drive, do some camping trips, and gone to Disney World as a family. But again, we didn't have much money, so it was always like a driving trip or camping, really. So there was a couple of those that we took in the U.S. But for the most part, my neighborhood was just all I mostly knew, you know. So I mean, even going downtown, I think I'd gone down there once, you know, growing up or something. And I loved reading and stuff, all these adventure books, you know, that you read. But also I loved history and all this sort of stuff. So I've read a lot about a lot of places. And I was, even in art school, I wanted to paint things different. It's like now I'd probably be more interested in Chicago, but that didn't interest me at the time that much. And so the closest I could get, in fact, the first painting that Sue's had her father buy is a painting I did from this Renaissance fair. It was like in Wisconsin. It was like an hour drive north. And so I would go there, a couple of my friends, we would go up there, Ramel de la Torre and us, we would go up there and just take some photographs of some models, hire some people or take photos of the gypsy dancers. So I did a whole bunch of paintings right in my last year and then the year after school. And I had a little show at the Palette and Chisel of a lot of them were Renaissance fair because they were colorful and they were exotic feeling and stuff, and they were fun. And so it was kind of fun because I have this whole little year or two of paintings of that. But then once Sue and I started to travel, and Sue's really the driver behind, you know, organizing these trips and saying, let's go to China, let's go to go to Spain and stuff. And I was like completely on board. I'm like, yeah, let's do it, you know. So we would save our money and we would just travel so cheap. We'd stay in pensions or you know, those hostels and stuff like that. So we were like, it was really just a plain fare. And then, I mean, even like it was always a question of whether we were going to order an extra thing of bread in Europe or not, because it was like our budget was so tight.
Paying extra for bread at a restaurant.
I know. It was so funny. And so everything was so tight, but it was so exciting to go. And then, of course, I wasn't interested in painting the dress-up history. You know, people dressing up as historical figures and stuff. It was more interesting going to places where people were actually, like the paintings, you know, from India or something, where this is the actual culture, the way they do it. Like even the Native American things I like to paint for, that I do for the Autry or for Prix de West. I like some of the paintings are people at powwows, and they're dressed in there, but they're now time. Like somebody even told me once, they said, well, you know, you shouldn't be painting all the neon type colors that people wear at powwows. You know, go to the museums and find the authentic costumes or regalia that they would wear. And I'm like, this is authentic for now.
It was what they were.
It's what they were now. And then even I'll do paintings of people just in the combination of, like in Tibet, of modern clothes and their Tibetan clothes, but the same thing with the Native American stuff. So now that's more interesting to me. But before I could ever go to those places, it was like you were kind of living vicariously through, you know,
but you've always been attracted to color.
I've always been attracted to the colorful costumes and the colorful outfits, and so yeah, it's just fun to go to places where that's, you know, you're doing authentic, but it's also they're part of the art. They're creating, you know, the art as well as you are, and you're kind of almost documentary style, capturing it and then adding your own viewpoint to it.
So speaking of like you liking to paint, you know, a lot of color, I wanted to talk also about sort of the difference in y'all's painting technique and what you like to do. Also sort of like, what's it like being married to two different artists, how you feed off of each other? Is it ever a healthy competition or an unhealthy competition?
We get that a lot.
I know.
I think, you know, what's really helped us is the fact that when I first, I mean, Scott was already making it, you know, so the dynamic of us, and maybe it's male-female too, is that it worked because I was such a beginner. There was never competition. I mean, it just, there was never anything like that. I have never been able to paint like Scott. I know that there's a lot of husband and wife teams where, you know, their paintings look very similar. Like, it just was, it was not in my wheelhouse to be able to like use that much paint or to be that confident. I'm a slow learner, and it definitely, I've had to figure things out almost like a roundabout way. But no, we've never had competition. I mean, if anything, we want the other person to succeed. I mean, the only thing is that we don't feel like we want to share a studio. We need separate space. We do paint models together, but in general, we do need that sort of alone time and just to have an identity. But we are attracted to the same stuff. I mean, we're both attracted to faces. We're both attracted to, you know, I guess authentic costumes and authentic, you know, outfits. We both like to travel. So like for a long time, we used to go on a trip and then have a show on that trip. And so, yeah, we might have a whole show, like 12 years ago was our first time we went to India, and we had a whole show on India. So we're both painting India, but it's definitely a different energy because Scott usually paints a lot bigger than me, and he usually paints thicker, and he literally loves to give a little bit of an edge. And then I always have this tendency to maybe make people a little sweeter or softer. I mean, I'm trying my hardest to give people like the character that they've lived up to, and I want to get to paint older people, older faces more, but in general, I just make everyone look really happy. And so we'd have all these paintings, and you know, it was just people would comment about, is this the same country? Because I mean, India sure looks really happy in your paintings, and then Scott's paintings, everyone looks a little
gritty,
dirty and gritty.
Or something,
and it's like, it's just the way we paint. He's
Well, and that's interesting too, because that just shows you also how paintings, you know, when you're doing a portrait or you're doing something, it's not just like taking a photograph. Even a photograph, you choose where to shoot it from. It's a true portrait of the artist and of the subject. Right. And so when you have two artists even painting the same subjects, you have a completely different painting. When you're really expressing what you want to express about it. And so that's what's interesting about it. And Sue will have a different, she is seeing a different country than I am.
You're technically better at me, so you
think so.
I don't think so. But I mean, if he wants to, he can do something incredibly refined. And then also something incredibly juicy and sculptural. Whereas It's not the same with me.
I think it's because it's like you want to. I think if you wanted to paint really thick or juicy, you would.
I just think that we all have a certain DNA, and we have to figure out our best traits. And also something that I have found with myself is that I always was judging myself so much against other people, comparison, and I think I stunted my growth a lot. Like I was talking to Divya, and a lot of other younger, especially women artists, I'm so proud of them for putting themselves out there, because I mean, like I said, Scott and I have been together for 30 years. For the first 22 years, I definitely never put myself out there. I wouldn't do demos. I wouldn't, be in big shows. I would hide my work. So it was more like this sense of judging myself, like, oh, I'm not good enough. And so it was my own fault. I was my own worst enemy, but it was these internal struggles that I was dealing with, because I was also, I don't think I knew what my voice was. And when you are so used to like social media and seeing all these great paintings, you want so badly to like do these beautiful things. And so for me, it was really difficult to be so influenced by like someone like Richard Schmid, because he really changed the language of art. He changed how people saw brushwork and light. And so for me, when I would close my eyes and I would think of a still life, it was very difficult to not think of a Richard Schmid still life. And so I think one of the biggest struggles for me is to like, who am I in not like just a copy of other things. And so it's just a longer journey for me, whereas like Scott dealt with that much earlier on, because he was influenced by Richard, but you were able to change your style so quickly after school, because what would happen is galleries and people, would call that whole group Schmidites, and they would want Scott to send, oh, could you send a still life like this? And so Scott literally just stopped doing still lifes, because he felt it's this like bubble or this like little pigeonhole that people are putting you in, like, this is what we want, and we know this is popular, and we know you can paint this, but then you kind of rebelled a little bit against it.
Even right from the beginning, it's like I loved Richard's paintings, and it's incredible, but I also felt, well, this is how Richard would paint it, and even though I couldn't do it, I did have a vision of what I wanted to paint, the types of things and the way I loved to paint really thick, and I loved color and the different way I wanted in different subject matters.
So you liked narrative.
Right, and I liked more narrative things, and I would get criticized from various people about that, and said go back into this path. But I kind of knew, even now I'm not doing exactly what I have in my mind.
We're all striving for better.
Always trying to get there. I did have a really sense of the type of things that I like to paint, and I really did not like people telling me I should paint this way. I mean, there was galleries that would literally say, we'll set you up in a studio, we'll pay you, but we want you to paint this sort of subject matter. And I would just say no, and even at the time when I had so little money in school. And so that was always something that I had in mind. And I think Sue had that in her mind, but she was, like you said, she was afraid to think, well, would people like this, or would they make fun of you,
I just didn't have the technical ability, or I didn't have the confidence. I think confidence sometimes comes first. And then like your ability kind of builds off believing in yourself. And I just didn't believe in myself for a long time.
Well, it's something like what you said earlier, I actually really liked that you said you couldn't paint like Scott. And I would say, aren't we all glad that you can't? Because you really found your identity, and you paint like you, which is. But
I can't even
really
like do a
powerful.
master copy of things. Like it's hard for me. It's like I have a block. I can't actually paint like other people, even if I wanted to do a master copy.
Well, I think that's actually a talent sometimes.
Well,
you might look at it as a limitation, but I think it can be a talent, because you have your own identity show through a lot easier that way.
Well, the flip side would be much worse, is if you could only paint absolute perfect copies of another person's style, but could never do your own. That would, to me, seem like the worst nightmare.
So speaking of that, though, so for the live stream, both Scott and Susan will be painting from the same model, and they're going to be basically painting their own interpretation of how they paint that model. So I was wondering if we could go into a little bit of what the live stream is going to look back like, so that people who might be interested in purchasing would know what they would be getting. So could y'all talk a little bit about how you would like to approach it?
We've done a few dual demos before, and I think they work out Well, we've learned over the years to not try and talk over each other. We both like to talk, and so, but I think it'll be good because I'm actually going to be working on a smooth board, and Scott's going to be working on. You're going to be thicker. It just naturally happens that way. I think we're also going to bring in a few examples so we can talk. Like Scott really wanted to talk about thick and thin and how you can paint differently.
Well, and how you can you have that choice of whether how loose you want to leave it or how refined. And I tend to start in the same way, and then. But I can show a couple different paintings. One that's left more,
Yeah, that'd be
thick
great.
and loose, and then other ones that were refined. Even though I start them out the same, thick, really thick, but then how you can bring it, and that decision is a hard decision. How,
well, and sometimes the model or the subject dictates
it,
you know,
exactly
like how juicy you want to get. You know, we'll talk about our supplies, and I think both you and I are very good about talking what we're thinking.
Right.
I mean, we both are not. We both don't have a problem with speaking. So you know, a lot of like when we're demoing, it's literally okay. I'm thinking this. I'm thinking this. This is what I'm mixing, and I'm thinking this. And Scott and I have you know, we do have a different approach. Like I'm definitely more simplifying and value, and Scott is more about like.
I work the whole thing together to try and get the brushwork and everything working kind of into each other. So it's a little different way of thinking. And
but I guess in general, from portraits, though, drawing number one, and then value, but those two. I mean, you know, especially when you're doing a quick portrait demonstration, these things can be tricky because they look almost flashy, like. It's, you know, magic. Like, how did all of a sudden you get this face? It's not like over days or weeks. It's pretty fast. It's very immediate and alla prima. And so I think we've tried really hard to be very direct in, okay, I'm thinking this, and that's why I'm doing this. This is why I'm choosing this brush. This is why I'm mixing it thin or thick, or why I'm doing it this way. And so, because I remember when I started off, I wished so much that I'd had instruction that was easy to understand, that it wasn't like, oh, you just figure it out, watch me and figure it out.
Right.
I really want people to understand, well, this is what I'm thinking, and I'm trying to like make it as simple as possible so that, you know, it's easily understood in that, because I want success for people. I want, you know, when I do a demonstration or I teach a class, I'm not trying to impress them with like how fast I paint. It's like, this is what I think you can do it, and I think you can do it this way, and just trying to banking it to the most basic stepping stones.
Yeah, and I think like for us, like Sue's doing a lot of workshops. She used to not do workshops, and I'm not doing workshops anymore. But when you do classes, I see myself in a lot of the students, and the different issues that people have are mostly about analyzing things. The technique doesn't really matter so much. It's about deciding how you're going to get your drawing, how you're going to compare values to each other. Those are really the cornerstones of whatever technique you do. And so we spend a lot of time talking about that. That's what our teachers talked about how to compare, how to see the relative values, how to design things into shapes, and you know how you figure out what color it should be, or what edges, or the different techniques of breaking a color down into painting purple or painting blue and red and letting the eye mix it. These are things that you don't know unless someone tells you.
Yeah.
So those are what I think we both concentrate on. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we are going to see everyone. If you haven't yet, if you don't know, you can write comments and questions, and I do think we have a couple of questions for people. Oh, okay. So just make sure you know that below the feed, the live feed, you will have an opportunity to be able to ask any questions that you would like. So. Also, just to reiterate, the live stream is on March 20th at 1 to 5. There is a buy now button below if you want to see what the price is for that. Also, to let you know, even if you can't attend live, you still will be able to purchase it later. You just won't be able to ask them questions during the actual demonstration of the paintings that they'll be working on. So, well, y'all, thank you so much. This has been incredible. I wanted to also ask just a couple of things on like in your painting styles, what are some of your art influences? Because I heard some of yours, but we didn't hear any of yours.
I think both of ours are very similar, but I guess I've always been very, very influenced by Nancy Guzik. She, you know, because I think it's like one of those deals where I saw her when I was so young. She was one of these first women artists, and she had such a sensitivity to her work. I love, you know, Sargent and Zorn. I was always been very, very influenced by a lot of Russians, Malevin and Arkhipov and all those Russians that about 100 years ago. Early, I think we were all very influenced by Mucha and Feshin and of course Richard, and I love Bettina Steinke. She's a woman artist that was super talented and I think died in the early 90s. But this famous woman, you wouldn't believe how like she led in the art world, and men just like looked up to her so much. And that's the sad part, is that a lot of these artists are not known that well nowadays. But so yeah, I guess to me, I mean, Klimt, I love, you know, as you paint more too, you start to get influenced by people that are pushing boundaries. And so who are some of your favorite?
Oh yeah, I mean, lots of those. And well, Sue too, it's like you're talking about being influenced by people and then making it your own. I think you do that even more than me. I mean, like she's doing a lot of things now which are more mixed media, and she's combining the different, you know, drawing and pastel and mixed media and things. That's kind of exciting to see. Yeah.
I mean, it's, but
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Well, aside from the live stream, what are some of the like future things that y'all have, projects, endeavors, workshops, things that y'all have going on in the
You
future?
have a lot, yeah.
well, Scott's going to
busy.
China in May.
You go to China, yeah.
And I'm going to Utah, and I'm going to try and get better at landscapes and going to the OPA show. And then Scott's going again to China in July.
And then we're going to have a show
We're having
too.
a two-person show the first weekend in November at Maxwell Alexander. So
Los Angeles, yeah.
in Los Angeles. And then, you know, it's, I don't know about you guys, but then, you know, you plan, even I have stuff a year and 18 months out. So
Yeah.
next year I already have a couple trips or stuff, and we have a couple shows. But, you know, it's, so there's a lot of exciting things going on.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So we have a question.
Yep.
From Mark Newsball. He says, "Hi guys, enjoying the time. Can you share tips for developing skills for seeing and applying a controlled color temperature in portrait painting?"
Oh, that's a good question.
Oh
Do you
my
wanna-
God, I was expecting an easy one.
I think that's a very good
Okay,
question.
Scott.
Oh, you want me to answer?
Yes,
Okay.
of course.
Well, I think color temperature is something that I had a lot of trouble in school with, because I was looking at things one thing at a time. So when we were in school, we were painting under like
Warm light.
warm light, a spotlight. And I got into a problem where I would look at each individual color and I was like thinking, what color is this? And I'd be trying to find the right pastel before I even got into painting. And it was only later that I started to realize how you have to actually move your eye around and compare that color to other colors in the painting, and to realize that the light itself is casting a certain harmony over everything. And so when I was in school, and if a person, say the person had a shirt that was like, you know, stripes, or it had something in it was pure red or pure blue and pure yellow, I would be looking at that one color and I'd be getting a pure yellow, pure blue, pure red. And other students and my teacher would point out that the light itself is creating, if it's a warm light and it has a yellowish cast to it, that yellow is only going to be the only pure one. And so then when you get to the red, it's going to be a little bit of a yellowish red. And then the blue is also going to have a little bit of a yellow cast to it. And so it wasn't until I started to see that. And then we also, when we painted in north light and we'd have a cool light on something, the opposite would happen. Only the blue could be the pure color. And then the yellow. And then the red would have a little bit of a blue cast to it. So I think that's the real key to creating a harmony, is to keep in mind, and you'll see it once you start to get used to that, you'll see the influence of the light. So the light has a color, and then the colors themselves. But that's the biggest problem I see for people getting a color harmony, is that they're looking at individual, and now cameras will do this sometimes, where when you take a photograph, it's not actually, everything is being oversaturated, so you've got pure yellows, pure reds, pure blues, in in all different areas, in shadows and light. So that's the key, is to keep that in mind right from the beginning, is to realize, what is the light that's hitting this object that's giving a certain unity to it? And then that will be what will give you your color harmony. Now, color harmonies can be pushed that way to where you move everything more towards a brown or a blue or whatever it is. And then if you're extremely struggling with that, what I'd suggest is to limit yourself on your palette. Like you hear a lot of people will hear about like the Zorn palette, where you'd use the analogous one would be like ivory black, which is a grade blue when you add white to it. Yellow ochre, which is a grade yellow, and then a pure cadmium red, which would be your pure red. So of the three harmonies, of the three colors, primary colors, you have two that are a gray version and one that is a pure version. That will give you an automatic harmony in your painting. So say you're working under something under a red light. If you use the gray blue and the gray yellow, it's forcing you now to have this harmony. Only the red will be pure. Now you can do the same thing by choosing a different color as the pure and use a gray. So like a lot of Sargent paintings, a lot of Sargent's paintings are just a darker burnt sienna and ultramarine blue and white, and that's it. And then sometimes they'll add a green in there or something, or some pure color that he'd need. But those will give you harmonies right away. So if you're having trouble with that, go to that as your starting point. And then when you think you need to add something as a pure color, it'll force you then to get a different tube and say, okay, this makes sense for this reason. So that would be color harmony kind of 101. There's more to it, but that's the basic important thing.
That's awesome.
All right, we'll do one more.
Okay.
What would you recommend for students to go about training if they don't have access to an atelier?
Oh, good. You want to take that one?
Well, like you guys, there's so many wonderful things. There's so many videos and YouTube videos. One of the things, greatest advice that I give people is that you have to find, I don't think anybody becomes an expert in a bubble. You have to find friends. You have to find at least one other person, just like a workout buddy, that you can paint together with, that you guys can critique each other's work, that you make time to use a work ethic, so you get together and paint each other. You have free models. I think the more people like-minded that you get together with, like a group, and sometimes I find that you have to be a leader. Like when we first moved to North Carolina, we didn't know anybody. So we just, it was a little bit lonely, but then we slowly would find models and just invite or have an open thing, and we'd invite people, or we'd go to a local gallery that we frame it, and then he would just say, oh, I know some local artists. And then sooner or later, but you have to be the one in charge. You have to make the time to do the still life or the model, and not rely on other people to set up a situation for your success. You have to make the situation for your own success. And but I do believe that people who are painting alone all the time, it's just a never-ending upward journey, whereas as long as you have some sort of community or some kind of support, the energy will get you there faster. So find a friend or somebody that you can paint with on a somewhat regular basis.
Yeah, that's great advice.
Yeah, another one. It's quite a good question.
Oh, go ahead.
It's quite a good.
Basically, they're just asking, what would you recommend to artists who don't have access to live models?
Still
Good
life.
question, yeah.
Still life. Also, there are lots of wonderful casts that you can buy. I mean, that's what these ateliers from Russia and all over the world do, is like literally they'll only work on casts for years before they get to a live model. I do believe that people jump into live really fast. So, and then it's overwhelming. Too much information, and then it's just frustration every step of the way. So still life first, then cast. And I mean, Scott and I both work from photographs. Now, I do believe that you will be able to have a friend pose for you, or have a family member, or do self-portraits. The only thing that I think that my greatest advice to you is actually have a strong lighting direction. Because too many people think that, oh, I'm just going to sit someone on a porch, or I'm just going to not have any light direction. You will not see the planes of the face if you don't have a window light. Or what we do a lot of times is like, what are those things called above the kitchen? What are those type of lights called?
Can lights.
Yeah, I mean lights that come from
lighting.
the ceiling, recessed lighting. Some of the best lighting we've ever done with models is just to put a model under one of those lights, have them slightly tilt their chin up, and then you have the most beautiful 5 darks of the face. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And that shows you the planes, and just do tons and tons of drawings, don't start off with oil drawings and then simple one-color paintings, but interact it with getting friends to pose. And that's why I was saying, if you could have like a buddy you paint with, you pose free for them, they pose free for you.
The reason that that's important is because, like, a lot of my paintings and Sue's, our best paintings are from photographs. So, like, that's from India that we did from photographs that I took. Now, while we were there, we had models. I had models posing all the time as well, and I did out on the spot things. The thing is, it's like I just had an artist, a friend of ours, Letissa, who's actually in that painting of Sue's. She came and we painted her cousin last week at my studio over a couple days. And she was looking at some of the photograph that I was working from, doing a painting that I'm working on right now at home. And she was commenting on all the things that were different in the photograph from the painting, especially values, you know, and stuff, because the clouds are all blown out and you don't see the different this or that. So that's why painting from life is so important, is because you start to see how things really look. Now, painting from photographs are great because they freeze the image. You can get subject matters that you could not do otherwise. You know, just the right moment, that right pose, you know, like taking photographs for things like that. I spend all day taking photographs of these things. I might just stay in one place until I get just the right pose. So that's a good thing. However, you can tell the difference between people who haven't done anything from life or enough from life, because then they're just copied photographs. The darks get all black, the color, like I was talking about color harmony. You know, the reds are all red, the blues are all, you know, everything, all these different things that you learn from painting from life. And that's why painting in an atelier or school is so good, because you do it every day for years. So I did, you know, years of painting from life in school before I started from painting from photographs. But then I was so excited to paint from photographs because I could get subject matters that were just so much more interesting and like what I wanted to do. However, I continued to always paint from life, you know, as well. Even though those paintings, a lot of those are just studies that I keep in my studio.
It's funnest to paint from life.
It is, yeah.
But your best paintings come from ones that
they're well thought out. I really get the subject matters. But you couldn't do those if you didn't do enough from life. So like Sue said, paint from photographs, but also paint still life. See if you can't get people to pose and things. So you can start to see.
Lighting is very important. Good light.
And if you're going to paint from photographs, you do need to really learn how to use a camera. Because I mean, I'll have people come into classes and show me photographs, say, well, you paint from photographs, how would you do this? And I look at the photograph and I'm like, I would never attempt to paint from this photograph because it's either done with a flash or it's just all black, you know, in the shadows. So if you're going to use all the people we know who are paint from photographs and do beautiful things, I mean, Richard Schmid, all these different people, they paint lots from life, lots from photographs. Their photographs are like art. You know, I mean, they're just incredible photographers as well. They have not said all the creativity just simply happens when I'm at the easel. They know, okay, the photograph is half of the battle. It's like setting your model up, like Sue's saying with lighting and stuff. Don't just plop them down. Put the time and effort into learning how to light something, how to get it interesting, and then how to photograph it so you have, it's never going to be as good as from life, but you want it to be the best you can, closest to give you.
Don't handicap yourself.
Yeah, don't handicap yourself. So put the effort into that. We'll spend years in art school and then we'll just say, oh, just grab a camera and just use it in automatic, and then you don't have anything. Then it's not worth working for. Yeah.
That's awesome.
Good question.
Okay, so one thing that I have not thought about that we need to make sure to announce is that we are going to be giving away one spot as a giveaway off of this platform. So what we need you to do, if you want to submit or enter for it, you need to share either on one of the platforms that you're on, YouTube, Facebook, or Instagram, and you'll go into a drawing and we will be announcing the winner on Monday. So just make sure to share and repost, and you will be entered. So thank y'all so much. This has been awesome. Really enjoyed this. Y'all get a lot more of this in next week, and so we're really looking forward to it. So
it'll be fun. We're excited.
Thank y'all so much for joining us, and we really look forward to seeing y'all next week.
That's right.
Thank you. Yeah, should be fun.
See y'all.
Well, cool. That was nice.
Yeah, it was awesome.
You guys are so professional.